Welcome, everyone. My name is Arie Barendrecht, and I'm the founder and CEO of WiredScore. I am truly excited to be welcoming you all to the first ever WiredScore Future Forum. This event is born out of our mission to make the world's buildings smarter and better connected, to enable a more collaborative, innovative, and dynamic future. The WiredScore Future Forum is a unique opportunity to explore Europe's digital landscape and frame the future of the built world together. We are delighted to be joined by hundreds of people today from all over Europe and have an exciting lineup of speakers, including the man himself responsible for the internet as we know it, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. At WiredScore, we believe passionately in the power of connectivity and its ability to bring different people in different buildings in different countries together. Back in 2013, WiredScore was started as a response to our clear need for better connectivity in our offices. And what started out as a drive to improve New York's digital infrastructure and support the city's innovative businesses has led us to build a global certification platform for tech in our offices and homes. Today, over 7 million people now benefit from WiredScore and SmartScore in over 20 countries. And we are extremely proud to work with over 800 of the top landlords, all the way from here in New York to New South Wales, helping them more deeply understand their buildings, improve them, and better communicate them to the market. The rate of technological advancement and our resulting reliance on it is only accelerating. And this has profound implications for how we interact with and within the built environment. However, it's not just important for us as users, but for our planet as well, that we can harness that technology for a greater benefit. Never before has it been so important that we build buildings with users, all of us, at the heart of them. The promise of WiredScore is that we will help ensure buildings all around us are future-proof and future-ready, connecting you to all the opportunities that tomorrow brings. Thank you very much, and over to you, William.
Thank you, Arie, and welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is William Newton, and I'm the president of WiredScore. Before we kick off, at the bottom right of your screen, you'll find our social media handles for you to be able to participate online. I'm going to guide you through a jam-packed agenda of really exciting speakers to kick off the first ever WiredScore Future Forum. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about what makes today so special and our theme for this year's Future Forum, Live, Work, Connect. Over the last year and a half, the real estate industry has been at the epicenter of one of the most important events of our lifetimes. The world in which we live, work, and connect with one another has gone through significant changes, and as a result, we've borne witness to a revolution in the way we conduct our day-to-day lives. I think that this change actually creates an opportunity for the real estate industry, a chance to create a built world that supports our new ways of working and living and connecting. To dig deeper into how these changes have impacted our industry, WiredScore has commissioned the Live, Work, Connect report to help decipher the influence that the pandemic has had on our way of life and provide an understanding of what decision makers should be prioritizing. Sanjaya Ranasinghe will later cover some of the research's findings, and you'll also be able to find the full report on our website. Returning to the topic of today, the WiredScore Future Forum is a chance for us all to come together and explore the future of Europe's digital landscape. I hope you'll enjoy the agenda that we have planned. Firstly, I'm going to pass you back over to Arie, who will be talking to Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, about the evolution of the web and what the future of technology and property looks like. We will then be joined by WiredScore's technical director, Sanj, who will talk about the impact of technological advancement within the built environment. Then we're going to dive into our first panel discussion on how real estate can adapt to hybrid working. Next up, we'll hear from Richard Pickering of Cushman & Wakefield, who will deliver a keynote on the future of cities. Our second and final panel is on the future of the digital landscape, the social, economic, and infrastructural implications. And finally, I'm going to announce the buildings and the accredited professionals launching across Europe with WiredScore and SmartScore. And now, I'm delighted to hand back over to Arie for a conversation with Sir Tim Berners-Lee.
Hello, Sir Tim. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to get started today by first introducing you to the audience for those who might not know you. So our guest today is the man behind the open, free web that we all know and use. His commitment to ensuring the web is an open space for all to share knowledge, access services, conduct commerce, and communicate in creative ways is second to none, and we are delighted to have him join us today. And if I can say for me personally, when I founded WiredScore 8 years ago, I don't think I could have ever imagined this opportunity to sit and chat with one of the most notable and influential inventors of our time. So thank you so much for being here at the WiredScore Future Forum. And how are you? And welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. Very pleased to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. We live in exciting times.
Let's kick off, and I think we should start by jumping in the time machine back 30 plus years, if that's okay. Back in 1989, you submitted a proposal to your boss at CERN for the World Wide Web. And I've read that your goal was to reframe the way we use information and the way we work together. Could we start by you sharing with us a little bit about your thinking behind the World Wide Web and why you created this?
I wanted it to be a universal thing. I wanted to be able to use it myself. I wanted to be able to use it for all the people around me at CERN. CERN, the lab where I was, is an amazing place. You should go there if you haven't visited. Full of people from all over the world, different languages, different computers, so a very, very heterogeneous environment. So very hard to figure out what was going on. And so I wanted to be able to solve that problem for me, and I wanted to solve the problem for everybody else. So anybody who joined my team, I wanted them to contribute to some hypertext web of information, which would then become the sort of the record, the go-to, or the record of the sort of institutional memory, if you like, of the project, and connected to all the other projects. So really, I invented it because I was frustrated that it didn't exist, and I wanted to use it myself.
This is probably a question you don't get asked a ton, but as we think about the way government and private enterprise can help improve access and equality, our audience today is people that work in real estate, people that own and run buildings. Any sense for how the folks that operate and build buildings could contribute here?
Yeah, there's a huge role to play. If you operate a building, and if you build a building, there's lots of things. And so it's not the first time, in fact, somebody asked that question, because people, from the landlord point of view, if you're a landlord, you're looking after people, you've got a huge amount of data about them. When you build, so there's whether you allow people to have complete control of their data, whether you make it, whether you use the fact that now we're living in a more of an IoT world. Of the IoT that most people have, a lot of it is in the building. So the first automation system people get is maybe the heating, and that may be run. And of course, making sure that you can collaborate. For example, if you're the landlord, you can collaborate with the tenant to make sure that the tenant doesn't end up sort of spending more money on fuel than they expect it to, and you can save the planet while you're doing it. So lots of ways in which collaboration between landlords and tenants, as the building gets smarter, that becomes obviously more complicated. Then, but of course, and then when you're building the buildings in the first place, obviously, it is good to build buildings so that they are wired so that people can use them effectively, both at the IoT level, but also so that we can do things like this, so everybody can work from home. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating place to click down, because I think at this time for people in our space in the real estate world, this is a very relevant and timely topic around data. And suddenly there's more data at our fingertips than ever before. And as you alluded to, that raises data and privacy questions. Data on who we are and what we do and where we're going is increasingly valuable to private enterprise, to governments and other entities. And a growing segment of the populace thinks that, we should be the ones benefiting from our data or profiting from our data, and not these kind of larger enterprises. What I wanted to ask as we click down is, from a data and privacy perspective, kind of what does success look like for us? Like, when we think about, is it having an understanding of how our data is being used? Is it something further? Is it having control of the data we create? How do you think about that?
I think that we've started the things like the GDPR regulations, for example, were famous because they made people do a double take and made it clear that basically this data is yours to control in principle. Then the solid things like the new internet technology, like the solid ecosystem, the solid protocol, mean that actually if you have a solid pod, then we have the technology. So if your company wants to be GDPR compliant, one way to do it is to put all the data in these solid pod. But it's not. You started off asking about, is it about knowing how it's used? Yeah, but actually knowing how it's used is the tip of the iceberg. Actually, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to have all that data, not just know, say, my health data. It's great that you're using it, my health data, for clinical experiments, for finding new drugs. But also, I want to pull that into my pod. I want to have my health data there. I want to have my runs, my fitness data. I want to have the data from my grocery ordering service, which knows if I live by myself, they know exactly what I've eaten. If I live with other people, they know what we've all eaten together. But if I pull in health data and fitness data and nutrition data, and we add that to data like what temperature my apartment's been at recently, then it's not about me knowing how to use it. It's about me using the data myself. There's a massive, but I think the big change is people will realize that if all of the data, which is all of the apps that they're using at the moment, and they add in all the cool apps which are coming down the pike, and they're adding in open healthcare, and they've got open banking, of course, already, so they've got all the financial data. The amount of data that they can pull in, and then suddenly the insights you get from data is when you connect it together. So doesn't go out with the amount of data you've got. It goes up with the square of the number of connections between different things. Oh, now you can connect health to fitness. Ooh, and now you can connect that to nutrition data. So now if I wanted to, suppose I'm going to run an app that'll coach me through running a marathon, tell me whether I should run a marathon or not at all. Suddenly, I can give that access to that all my data and all the stuff I've eaten and all the stuff I've bought, which is much more information about me down the line than any one company has. So the value I get from my data actually is more, because I get it all together. I integrate that data all together, including the house data, the building data in there. It's valuable to me because I can link it all together, but also because it's about me. So if I've got, if I can run programs which will be on my side, which will just flag, by the way, have you checked with your doctor whether you could be diabetic, for example, or have you, or I noticed that you've been, you don't seem to be so fit. Can we talk about how have you been feeling recently? You haven't been out so much. So the amount of benefit I could get from apps which work for me rather than from anybody else is actually, that's where the massive gain is.
Really interesting. So it's about breaking down those silos, which we can kind of only do when we can control and store our data in the way that we want to.
Yes. Got it.
I see some parallels there, if I can, to the built industry, and we created a smart building certification, which is really focused on user outcomes and the way humans interact with buildings, and the data, the power and value that data and the way we interact with buildings can create. Are there any use cases in this kind of decentralized philosophy specifically related to the way we interact with buildings that you're excited about, or lessons you think landlords can take from the concept of decentralization and in terms of how buildings can run and operate better?
Well, I think that I've always been a fan of sort of home automation and being able to sort of access the state of my home and get it to warm up and cool down from my phone at a distance and things like that. And that's straight. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some things that everybody will want. But then I think what is interesting, and initially people will install systems just to be able to get the benefit from one of these things, but then down the road we'll find people will discover particular pairs of, if you get this and this, if you if you monitor your the temperature and you monitor the power consumption, then you will be able to learn a certain thing about. And so, bit by bit, people will get little bits of insight until it starts to grow. And then, of course, it's very exciting space for developers. So developers who want to write programs, apps that work for people. The app on my phone, often a lot of them, they work for other people. They're trying to distract me to go and buy something else and to stop me sort of getting my homework done, getting my work done. But in the world of solid, in the future world in which people have got control of their data, then these apps which work for that. It's great to be a developer building these. A lot of developers are sort of filtering through the ether, finding the solid project because they just find it so much rewarding to build an app which is the agent of the user, which is the agent of the citizen, of the consumer.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think people will increasingly choose spaces, whether an office they want to work in or a home they want to live in, based on the data that is accessible from that space, but particularly how that data is used, and it's used ethically and being used as it should, not just how it could be used. I'd like to kind of close looking forward. And you touched on this a little bit already, indirectly, about some of the work you're doing now. You've co-founded a new company called Inrupt, and Inrupt is a technology solution that puts individuals in control of their data and allows developers to thrive in a kind of open innovation marketplace. My hunch is you created this company knowing that we're ever increasingly reliant on technology and data, but also using your learnings and thoughts from the last 30 years in this space. Considering those learnings, where do you see the world going from here? How do you see the technological world changing the most going forward?
So we've been talking about a sort of a backlash, and you've mentioned that people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that they should be controlling their data, they should be benefit from their data, and the solid protocol and the idea of having compatible solid pods. That's like you have several email addresses, you may have several different solid pods. The idea that when you have the solid pods, you'll be a different world where you will actually get much more benefit from your data because you'll actually be able to use it yourself. So yes, and to make that actually come into existence, I felt it would be good to start a company. And so I co-founded one with John Bruce. John Bruce is my co-founder and CEO at Inrupt, Inrupt.com. com, and over the last few years, Interrupt has been building stuff, which was great to have when you have a company. Research groups are great, universities are great. When you have a company, you can say, let's build this, and you build it. And so Interrupt has built very serious industrial grade pod providers. So if you want to give pods to your customers, or you want to give pods to your citizens, then call John. And we've had a lot since people discovered we were doing this, and we've had a lot of incoming. We've never had to reach out to anybody. We've had it coming from large companies, and in a number of fields, and people in healthcare. We've had organisations in healthcare. We've had but also from governments. And if you're in a way, you can think it's quite logical, because from a government point of view, they're enabling. If they give everybody in a country a pod, then the country becomes more efficient, and it's better for industry, because industry can now deal with the customers through their pods, or even if it's from having. Do you have a driving license to having a gadget which allows you to check that I can come into the pub because I'm over 18. Even though without revealing who I am, for example. So governments have been queuing up, and the first in the line is the government of Flanders, and so Flanders they decided they want to give everybody, and they've taken that we are building with Flanders. Interrupt is in fact building. It's quite interesting, a data utility company, because this was a way. So it's a joint venture between the government and Interrupt, which the data utility company will give citizens pods, and so and it's so it could be set up rapidly. And apparently the Flanders government has done this before with some other utility. They just said, we'll do it. Well, Flanders isn't that big. We'll just give everybody electricity, or we'll just give everybody internet. And then when we've done that, then we will then turn it into a commercial venture and let it compete in the market. But for now, the insight they had was that they could just bootstrap this thing. And so that's a really interesting model. Flanders is the first. There's 5 other countries. We're talking to them now and just scheduling how we roll that out. And so looking at it from my point of view, the web spread virally. The web grew by my server grew by a factor of 10 every year for the first 10 years, for 3 years. But then if you go back up by a factor of 10 every year, then in 11 years you've got the whole planet. But if a government comes and orders it now, then you've got a whole country. So in a way, that's the way collaborating with governments is a way of getting things up to speed in a way that a government initiative can do, and it's even faster than viral growth.
It's fascinating, and just to make sure I understand this, the idea here is that the government is creating with your platform a space, a digital space for me to put my data and to store it and to allow access to it and to combine it and do all the things I'd want to do with it. But I'm the person in control of the pod.
Yes, the pod is like exactly a pod. It's like a USB disk drive in the sky, if you like. It's a personal cloud. It's like a sort of G drive or Dropbox or any of those things. Apart from, in fact, it's open, solid standard. So if you want to give access to somebody in your you want to give access to a photograph in your pod to somebody, if you know their solid ID, then you could do that. It doesn't matter which of all the solid providers, doesn't matter which country or which company gave them their solid ID, all the solid IDs are compatible, and all the pods are compatible. So I can run my slideshow program on the photos in your pod, and different people at the same time. Your kids can run their slideshows, programs on their phones on the same photographs in your pod at the same time. So because it's all open, it's all interoperable, it breaks open those silos. So very, very exciting.
And how do you see the world changing as this technology kind of gets spread across the world in 10, 20 years? What do you think might be most different than where we are today?
Well, I think in 10 to 20 years, I think we'll have sort of the transformation, the enablement of people. People will be very much more enabled, very much more powerful. And what I hope is that also society will. So if you get a solid pod, you have if you like, it's this, sort of like a disk drive in the sky. You can write any program on it. One of the things you can write is you could write a new collaborative social network program. You could write a new program for help a town figure out how to organize the planning permission discussions. You could you could look how other people have built sort of discussion tools and debate tools, and together, if all the people using Solid work together to think about how can we use this to be more efficient, more effective as a democratic society? How can we use this to take local concerns about climate change and channel them up to the global level? So let's build the social networks, instead of social networks where you just like people and you end up liking people who are just like yourself. Let's build networks which stretch us a bit, help us collaborate with people that are different, live in different countries, speak different languages, but live on the same planet. That's what I want us to do.
Amazing. That's a future I could get excited about. I think with that, this is probably a good place to leave it. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. Thank you for all your contributions thus far, but it sounds like this is only just the beginning in terms of how you're going to lead us into the next phase of our technological future. So thanks for being here again at the WiredScore Future Forum, and I hope to meet in person sometime.
Me too. Thank you, Arie. It's been fun.
Thank you, Sir Tim.
Thank you, Arie, but most of all, thank you to Sir Tim. That was absolutely fascinating. To pick up on one of your points about data, it seems that now is the time for all of us to try and set best practice on how we both use and manage data, whether or not that's personal or environmental or business or operational. The benefits and the value of the insights that open data can produce are really remarkable. I think as we look forward over the next 20 years, I believe that data is going to be the primary driver of the enablement of both people and of society. Thank you for that talk. To continue with our topic of technological change, I'm now going to pass over to Sanjaya Ranasinghe, who will talk about the impact of technological change that it's having on the built environment and on its users.
Thanks, William. Today, I'd like to outline to you our vision of why the optimized hybrid way of life will be enabled by technology and delivered by the built environment. Hybrid will be successful when it is optimizing how we work, live, and connect, not when it provides an acceptable compromise. This is why we're not anywhere near the end of the journey to hybrid today, and in truth, we never will be. This journey starts a couple of 100 years ago, as the human race started to operate in a way that we still relate to today. At that time, we operated in separate spheres of our life, with living space, working environment, and cultural areas not being capable to do anything but what they were set out to do. Technology slowly started to enter each of these sectors, be it electricity, wide-scale access to computing, or social media. And as a result, these separate spheres started to blend into each other. To many, this was seen as technology eroding the barriers between these spheres, and often led to as many negative implications as positive ones. This trend of technology infiltration was fast-forwarded and driven to what some might see as its most extreme endpoint with the mass move of the lockdowns we've seen in 2020 and 2021. Suddenly, everything was happening from a single physical location, our homes. we were completely reliant on technology to enable most aspects of what we had for living, working, and connecting. Technology brands became the go-to words for these key actions. A typical life in the day at the time would be, I Zoom for work, I Peloton for my well-being, and I house party with my friends. What's interesting here is how old this already sounds. House Party's active users have slumped to the extent it stopped operating last month. Even Peloton have seen growth and sales expectations slashed in recent months. There have been successes from this time. Those of us with great connectivity at home, working for companies with a forward-thinking approach to both ways of working and their technology, have discovered the potential of hybrid. However, in the years to come, as we move away from this setup, we have a real opportunity to rethink how we work, live, and connect. So what's it going to take to evolve to an optimal hybrid way of life? The focus has to be on how technology can be the enabler rather than the solution. We need to blossom from the position we've been in over the last 2 years, where we've been solely reliant on technology. Being in a position where we're enabled by technology will allow us to effectively cross between these aspects of our lives wherever and whenever we choose. So we've seen that a fully technology-driven world, such as the one we faced through 2020 and 2021, is not the way to an optimized hybrid way of life. So let's now consider how technology can be that enabler. Historically, the way technology has impacted the way we live has been encapsulated by phases of time labelled as the industrial revolutions. General understanding is that we're currently in the fourth industrial revolution, but consideration needs to be given to us actually already being in the fifth. Each industrial revolution has brought similar concerns that machines would replace humans, but ultimately each has resulted in an enhancement for our lives. From the 1700s, in the first industrial revolution, steam power and mechanisation enabled factories to produce goods that previously had to be made by skilled craftspeople. The 1800s brought on the rise of electrification and telecommunications, and the second industrial revolution enabled the mass production and new ways for individuals to interact with each other. The third industrial revolution, that we've all lived through, heralded the mass computerization of our lives and transformed the office and the world of work as we know it. Earlier this century, computerization moved to digitization, with the introduction of a new generation of tools such as AI, IoT, and blockchain. And right now, as we're poised to create an optimized hybrid world, the fifth industrial revolution is here to make technology the enabler through personalization. To understand technology enablement a little more, let's look at the key differences in approach between the fourth and the fifth industrial revolutions. Whilst phrases like AI, blockchain, and IoT have all become commonplace in the worlds we operate in, very few, if any of us, really comprehend what their potential actually is. This intensifies concerns that our own personal sense of worth will be impacted and also leads to a drive to reject them as solutions. In real estate, we're seeing these technologies mainly be applied to the operational side of buildings to make them more efficient via the likes of digital twins and preventative maintenance systems. Whilst important, this approach does not truly make space responsive to our needs, be they at home or at work. Fortunately, the fifth industrial revolution looks to address this. By humanizing technology, we're able to switch from operational efficiency and cost savers to user experience. The fifth industrial revolution takes the technology pillars of the revolutions before it and then critically adds a sense of personalization to it. Rather than looking for things to be bigger, faster, and cheaper as a result of technology, we're measuring success via personal outcomes such as innovation, purpose, and inclusivity. As mentioned by Sir Tim Berners-Lee in our interview with him, we need to feel empowered to take back control of our data, intellectual property, and earning potential from the big technology companies that have taken control of technology as we know it. Real estate needs to embrace this shift in technology via two key features. Firstly, how we interface with technology, and secondly, how we ensure our buildings are capable of delivering the promise of this fifth industrial revolution. So firstly, how we interface with technology in our homes and offices needs to change. Each industrial revolution has evolved how we interact with technology, known as the human-to-machine interface. The first industrial revolution gave us machines to replicate our actions directly and consistently. The second stopped us directly making things and gave us mechanical controls over mass production. The third added computers to interact with those mechanical controls. And the fourth added data automation to control those computers. At all these times, what has lagged behind is a true and singular focus on how we can actually collaborate with the technology around us to drive true integration. For a successful implementation of the fifth industrial revolution, we need a unified interface, a single way of getting done what we need to get done. We're seeing good progress on this in real estate, with the technological fundamentals required for this being developed, such as open standards for smart building data, along with a new breed of master systems integrator capable of delivering features that we actually need. However, multiple apps on one phone or a tablet isn't the answer, nor are multiple single pane of glass views of performance. We need a true, unified interface to meet our evolving expectations of the hybrid world. Continuing that theme of unification brings me on to the second technology enabler I'm going to cover: the future wireless communications technologies in real estate. This slide shows some of the patchwork quilt of wireless protocols any smart building needs to consider supporting. Each has its own specific purpose, be it high speed, long distance, or low power. Fundamentally, they all use radio waves to operate machine-to-machine communications, connecting everything from our computers to our phones to things that control our environment, energy consumption, and even waste creation. From a real estate perspective, we have the continuing problem that if buildings aren't appropriately set up to accommodate these wireless protocols, the technology enablement simply won't be able to happen. If we now switch to a people-centric view, the patchwork quilt of connectivity for our own requirements still exists, with Wi-Fi and mobile in particular. We have to chop and change between networks to enable us to be connected when we want to be. A way for addressing this could be on the horizon. A new generation of satellite communications is dawning on us, with the likes of Starlink from the makers of Tesla and SpaceX. This could enable us, as individuals, to be connected wherever we are in the world without having to switch between Wi-Fi and mobile, paying roaming charges, or worrying about the security of our connection, given how its delivery model has no geographic bounds. So we've seen how technology has been shaped to enable the optimized hybrid world. Now finally, let's look at what the built environment needs to do to deliver this. The challenge for everyone gathered here today is that the built environment is the key element for successfully delivering an optimized way of working, living, and connecting in a hybrid world. This quotation from our research reports brings into sharp focus what the built environment needs to do. Buildings must adapt to this challenge to become more sustainable, more customer-focused, and critically, we must be able to measure performance by becoming more technology and data-centric. There are 4 key areas to highlight and focus on in the final section of this presentation. Firstly, buildings must adapt and become better for their users, that this needs to be done in a sustainable way, and finally, we must measure performance. To start with, I want to take further insight from our research report for how buildings must adapt and become better for their users. From a residential perspective, as has widely been reported, there are significant well-being improvements from being able to work in a hybrid way. But when not in the office, especially when thinking about working from home, 60% of people have had that same well-being impacted by poor connectivity. It's clear that connectivity delivered to our homes needs to improve, and not just from a speed perspective. The stability, security, and setup of our home connectivity needs to be considered with as much focus as is currently put on speed. Additionally, we need to know where we live is supported by additional services, be that in amenity space or via smart technology, and be aware that our homes must evolve from a connectivity perspective to best deliver on our future hybrid world. From homes, next to our workplace and how they need to adapt for users. Around 4 in 5 of us want our office space to be technology advanced, but less than half of us actually know how to use all the building technology we have available to us. This really reinforces that while technology is the enabler and something that people want in their working environment, if it isn't delivered in a human-centric way with consideration for the implementation of that human-to-machine interface, it won't be successful. As well as considering the deployment of technology to drive better user experience, we also need to ensure we're evolving the built environment in a sustainable way. There's a well-used slogan to represent the core approach to take for this sustainable development. Originating from somewhere between the second and third industrial revolutions, the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle continues to be relevant with how we must approach the delivery against our ever-changing requirements for the built environment. Top of our collective conscience must be impact the built environment has on our environment. Again, technology can enable the industry to respond positively with the appropriate mindset to application that reduce, reuse, recycle in that order will enable. Firstly, reduce. Data is the new oil is taking on a new turn as we understand the energy impact of storing and processing data. We must strategically consider what data we actually require, how it can be reused, and make sure we don't store more than we need to, both for environmental and ethical reasons. Secondly, reuse. Technology deployment can enable successful retrofits of our buildings over knocking them down. Additionally, whatever form of deployment you're thinking about in your development, getting smart technology requirements into the plan as early as possible, not as an afterthought, maximizes the reuse potential. And finally, recycle. Don't underestimate the range of use cases one piece of technology can deliver, and always push to see how combining technology can drive new use cases. For example, occupancy sensors have gone from delivering density monitoring tools to social distancing monitors between 2019 and today. And finally, a tech-enabled built environment will drive rewards in the real estate industry by how we can measure performance to a new set of requirements. We're entering a place where the built environment's success can and must be measured. Firstly, carbon and other emissions. As a space provider, not only do we need to consider the emissions your building creates, but also that you're actually a supplier of emissions to your tenants. Secondly, with ESG, owners, operators, and occupiers need to use the technology in their space to directly input into their ESG reporting, measuring against the environmental impact, supplementing the social experience with technology, and reporting for governance requirements. Finally, success will drive value in buildings. Much like we've seen over the last decade of how connectivity has driven property value, further technology deployment will drive reward in investment value and rents in the years to come. In closing, we believe the built environment is key to how an optimized hybrid way of working, living, and connected can be created for all of us. Technology is undoubtedly the enabler of this, but we need to move to placing much more focus on how technology is built for us, the user, rather than for the sake of creation of new technology itself. This will ensure we flourish in a sustainable and optimized hybrid world that lays ahead of us. Thank you. I'd like to pass back to William.
Thank you, Sanj, for those insightful thoughts. It's incredibly energizing to consider what a positive impact we can make via the built environment on the world around us. Now it's time to turn to our first panel on how real estate can adapt to the new world of hybrid working. I'll hand over to our moderator, Roelof Opperman, the partner and co-head of the Europe team at Fifth Wall, to introduce some of the leading thinkers from across the industry. Welcome, Roelof, and thank you for joining us today.
Great to be talking with everyone. We've got a great panel today, and we're going to be talking about hybrid work and the future of work from some of the leading experts globally. Before I start, I've just got a quick public service announcement. There is a Q&A button that you should have, and so feel free to be asking questions in the Q&A there. We have a Q&A session at the end that, as you have questions, feel free to put them in there, and then at the end we'll answer them. Great panel today. I'm going to introduce them one by one. So we have Despina Katsakakis, Global Head of Total Workplace, Cushman & Wakefield. We have Paul Begast, Head of Property Standards from RICS. We have Philip Boyer, Director Relations Institucionales and Innovation at Covivio. We also have Ronan Giorno, an old friend of mine, Senior Managing Director, European Head of Management Services and Operations at Heinz. So great to have everyone here. Really excited to talk about this topic. I guess, Despina, starting with you, in a lot of ways, we've had a shift in the living and working habits post-pandemic that really has resulted in, user needs and expectations changing quite dramatically. And so, what role do you think real estate plays in responding to these changes?
Thank you. This is a great question. Of course, it's something we've all experienced very personally in the last couple of years. I think what we've seen is that the pandemic has dramatically changed all of our perceptions and accelerated trends of how we will live and work in the future. For many businesses, I think home working during lockdown provided a proof of concept that employees can still be productive remotely, and certainly has encouraged a debate around the extent to which they're planning to allow employees to work from home for at least part of the working week, if not more. However, it's really interesting to note that while home working can bring benefits such as reduced commuting and flexibility, it also brings a lot of disadvantages. So our research of over 125,000 participants definitely shows that while people have continued to work remotely, they're still struggling to stay connected with colleagues and organizational culture, and they're missing that mentoring, teaming, and social opportunities. This is, I think, particularly important for career development of younger employees, and they're the ones that have suffered the most working remotely during the last 2 years. Having said all that, it's still important to note from an expectations perspective that 78% of people expect flexibility and choice moving forward. So the
Right.
future of work and place, it's not going to be binary regarding the office or remote. It'll be about balancing the home, the office, and third places to support functional needs, convenience, well-being. And in some ways, the more we can work remotely, the more significant the role of place becomes. And offices will continue to have a very important role and a new purpose to foster collaboration, community, friendships, and all the associated productivity, social, mental health benefits. So, as we have greater choice of where we work from, there's a lot more pressure to create inspiring destinations that support people to do their work better, that support well-being. We have no doubt all become air quality experts in the last couple of years. So we now recognize
Yes.
that the built environment actively supports us. So a lot of implications for design and operations will be significant in terms of offices. And finally, kind of most importantly, space, as we heard from the previous discussions, will be supported in a completely dynamic way by real-time data. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting areas of innovation, the ability to leverage data to help manage space utilization, carbon reduction, and user experience and well-being.
No, that's great. No, I great points there, and I think what you're highlighting, right, is that shift of expectation versus the physical reality, and how it's kind of misaligned right now, right? And so I
Yeah.
guess Ronan, going to that, I think in a lot of ways there's been kind of a changing purpose of office, and that's really challenged landlords, including Heinz, one of the biggest landlords I think in the world, to kind of evolve their products, right, and match the new needs of the occupiers. You've had this expectation shift, and then real estate companies and landlords realizing, oh my gosh, like we're not producing what people want, really, right? I guess, how do you see the future of hybrid working? And I guess, what are the quick wins you could give guidance to for landlords and owners? Obviously, Heinz being kind of a leading owner operator out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'll share with you what we're doing. So, I think the starting point And it may sound obvious, but really to recognize that the whole built environment is about human experience. Yes, it is about investment. Yes, it's about placemaking. But at the heart of it, as we heard in the introduction, it's all about human experience. And with that, for landlords and operators to recognize that the people who pay the rent are our clients. And we need to have a very consistent, meaningful way in which we engage them. And really be authentic about that. Simplify the touch points that our tenants, our clients have with us. The industry is fairly fragmented, and I think we need to help them overcome that. As the speaker said, I think it's a joint effort between operators, landlords, and clients to deploy the right tools to collect data, but not only collect data, but also enable some meaningful benchmarking between locations, between assets. It's one thing collecting data about efficiency and experience, but if you really don't know how good is good, what do you do that? I think another area is looking at the amenities that you offer in that destination as a landlord with the ecosystem of providers around you, and make sure that you align the offering with what your key clients are expecting and how their internal clients' needs are changing, expectations are changing. And when I say internal clients, I mean the employees of every large occupier. Last 2 points I would say is focus on the narrative of the location, right? The brand value proposition of that building, of that location is meaningful. And we're seeing more and more examples of that, across Europe, where landlords are getting together with real experts and say, well, what is the history of this location? What's the attraction? Why would people come here and spend a day here? And finally, I think we should look at flex. What type of flex do we offer within the context of the location that we own, within the context of the asset, within the client mix that we have, and how do we support their fluctuating needs of space? And I would say there's no room for complacency. Right? But in the last 2.5 years, I think we've all witnessed that the new benchmark has become our home, our neighborhood, and really together we need to ensure that those locations are attractive, offering the best experience that we could possibly have. A long way to go.
A lot of work to do there. But I love that phrase. I mean, I think, I get to live in London and there's so many inspirational places to go visit, right? Churches, old buildings. And there is something about a great workspace that just is inspirational. And I think that does bring people back. That does create ideas and innovation. And I do think it's why you've seen the big tech titans invest considerably in real estate throughout this pandemic. So, and I guess moving over to Philippe, I guess, in a lot of ways, the hybrid future is kind of part defined by the occupier and the customer, and then part defined by the landlord or the real estate industry. I guess what role does real estate play in defining kind of what the future of hybrid work looks like?
Good morning. Good morning to all of you. It's very good to be with you today. A very vast question to answer to. I love this quote. I guess it was from Winston Churchill, who once said, to improve, you have to change. And he said, to be perfect, you have to change often. I think that the real estate industry is a little bit like Churchill said, always adapting to something new. And for sure, this is what has been said before, COVID-19 has boosted new ways of working. I think real estate has a very important role when it comes to define the future of work. It means as we are a long-term investor, Covivio is a long-term investor and landlord, we have to design and to build more than ever buildings with new features. The first priority for companies such as Covivio is to design spaces that attract people back and retain them. So to do so, I guess that offices need to be what I called often a desired destination where people collaborate, interact face to face. What we see is that a lot of companies are currently redesigning their workspaces where people come in, collaborate, innovate, talk. And through the COVID crisis, we have all learned that we can perform a certain task being at your office, whereas in the past, maybe our first reflex was to take a plane sometimes for sometimes less than 1 hour meeting. That was a complete nonsense. So we are entering into a more hybrid real estate world in which people will be more careful with their time. I think we have all learned also from COVID. There are tasks you can do from home, obviously, and other tasks you have to be at your office, especially the ones when it comes to interact, to collaborate, to share. And as a consequence, it's our role, our, would say, responsibility to design new types of building. Let's call them hybrid. It's maybe one definition, but integrate a higher proportion of common spaces where to meet, where to chat, where to relax, where to have a drink, versus working spaces. Just to give you a few examples about Covivio. Covivio, we have currently several several projects under development, which already integrate such a hybrid workspace principle, whether in Paris with a SOPOP under construction called SOPOP in Paris, or whether in Milan with Vitae operation. This building, to be delivered in the coming months, have this characteristic: design with terraces and trees, designed to let natural light come in, design with all kinds of new services and amenities, and design, I'm not forgetting, I'm talking into a WiredScore conference, design with a higher connectivity, which is obviously something very important. The second priority, I guess, refers to the fact that the real estate industry more and more relies on technology. On this topic, what is obvious is that data is reshaping real estate. Technology helps monitor building thanks to IoT, thanks to IA, thanks to BIM and BOSS technologies and higher connectivity. We are now able to design and to maintain building according to new technologies, and obviously totally differently what we are doing in the previous years. So at Covivio, for instance, obviously we are working with WiredScore. We are very happy about that for several of our buildings. But also we are developing a new experimentation based on IoT, smart metering as to get the building consumption, sensors measuring air quality inside the building, sensors measuring real-time occupancy. So more than ever, besides designing new building, technology we have to rely on as to give a concrete aspect of this hybrid building.
It's a really good point, and I think that one thing that I read the other day that really hit home, just being at the interface of kind of the occupiers plus the customers and the real estate people, is that one thing we're telling a lot of corporates is you kind of need to make sure you tell your employees that you don't really know when the end state's going to be, right? That we're going through this journey together. There's an old saying in like prisoner of war camps that the ones that survived were the ones that accepted they didn't know when they were going to leave, right? And I think you kind of have to go into that mentality of we're going into a new area. I think we'll be better off at the end of it, but we're going to struggle. But you do need to have a plan, right? You need to have a plan, and you need to have a real motive, because it's a system, and it's like, there's a reason we tell people to drive on the wrong side of the road. If everyone just drives however they want to, it's complete chaos. So I guess thinking about that in the existing stock, Paul, looking at the statistics, obviously the vast majority of European office stock has not upgraded over the last 2 years for this new environment. So, from your perspective as an industry body, do we have like a really long way to go, or like where are we on this journey in terms of the stock itself?
It's a really good question. It's a difficult question, but I mean, I'm filled, even listening to this conversation, I'm filled with sort of tremendous optimism about the direction of travel for the profession. I think a few years ago, challenges were met with sort of groupthink. There was an awful lot of sort of, let's see what everyone else does and we'll sort of copy them, etc. But I think we are seeing a lot of innovation, and we are seeing a lot of collaboration, which is great. We are understanding data better, but I think the key thing is we're becoming more strategic in our thinking. And I think, therefore, the thing I've been most impressed with over the opportunity to talk, all around the world, talking to different markets in Africa, Australia, North America, Europe, et cetera, is the ability to design solutions that are appropriate for the organization themselves, rather than just implement change just for the sake of implementing change. And those changes will be implemented through the use of understanding data, using the right technology at the right time, etc. So, and I think it's really crucial that we don't rush into these sort of solutions. So I get a real sense that the industry is responding in a very strategic, considered way. There are lots of challenges, clearly, in terms of existing stock and retrofit and how we're going to meet the green challenge. And I think the thing I'm most impressed with is this really deep understanding that buildings are complex and they are very people centric, but you also have a responsibility to run them financially, sensibly and credibly, but you also have a responsibility to provide safe, compliant spaces, and those things are all very connected through data, and therefore the decisions you're going to make will be connected by using that data well. And therefore, whilst it's difficult to say, well, there isn't one size that will fit all. Every organization will take a view, and I think that's real progress for our industry, that the property industry is able to kind of take that very strategic approach to make sure organizations do the right thing for them, rather than just saying, well, everybody else is doing this, we'll do that. So in terms of the future of buildings, clearly there will be lots of change and lots of sort of redesign. The RICS research will tell you that that's happening, but I think it's encouraging that we are sort of taking our time to think about that very strategically, and there isn't one size that's going to fit every organization, and that's exactly the right thing to do. So that I think is very encouraging.
No, I think that's great, and I guess that's a good segue to kind of my next question for Desmina, which is, it's interesting because in technology, when we're talking to software companies or tech companies, you can get instant feedback from a customer, right? So you do a lot of A/B testing, and then you test it, and then you see how people like it, don't like it, figure out your pricing. It's a little harder in the built world, right? But there is this kind of feedback loop that's helping. But I guess at a broader perspective, what role do you think technology will play in this kind of hybrid transition, let's call it, as we move forward?
Well, I think, as we heard from Philippe, technology is going to be critical to enable the transformation we've been discussing. But we need to kind of set it in context, right? The first imperative will be absolutely the need for carbon reduction when we look at buildings and what the impact is that they have on carbon. And we know that traditional building operations and management will just not be sufficient to ensure the long-term viabilities in terms of delivering environmental targets. So the need to reduce whole life carbon will require technology to manage the end-to-end building operations in real time with a more proactive and eventually predictive approach. From cleaning to ventilation to measurement and verification of the building sustainability performance, operational processes will need to shift towards a more data-driven, proactive, and predictive over time approach. Now, alongside the sustainability drivers, of course, there are the imperatives to manage cost and user experience effectively, particularly as we move to this more dynamic use of buildings with hybrid working. And, utilization and cost of space is really interesting, because if we look at pre-pandemic, typical office space utilization was 50% of the typical workday. So we were kind of working in a hybrid way, but not recognizing it. But that's not viable moving forward. So the need to have reliable multi-source data to validate the effective utilization of space will be another key requirement. And of course, as we've discussed, the user expectations have completely changed, as employees now want to be able to find and book the right space to support their individual or collaborative work needs. They want to co-locate with the people they collaborate with. They also expect to track the environmental factors in the building that impact them. And all of that alongside accessing amenities and services and personalizing the experience. And as we heard earlier, all of that delivered in a very human-centric way. So having the technology infrastructure to future-proof and enable that user functionality will be absolutely essential. And I suppose the big challenge is there's so much innovation happening in this space that there's a critical need for frameworks to help both occupiers and landlords to navigate the appropriate solutions that can effectively and securely manage data to deliver value to the individual, value to the organization, and ultimately value to society.
Ronan, I see you shaking your head there. I mean, anything to add on that point?
No, I think this, just to build on this on the Spinner's thoughts there. I think that what we've seen pre-COVID, and I think what we're going to see accelerated, is that large occupiers are digging into data, right? They want to understand real utilization. They want to understand what the current office occupancy is translating into in terms of carbon footprint. And equally important, they're engaging their employees. They want to understand expectations. And if you triangulate, these data points, it's leading many occupiers to the conclusion that they need to optimize their footprint, reinvest in what they retain. But at the same time, if they're looking at new locations, then perhaps they're willing to spend more for less. So perhaps smaller footprint, but higher quality location, higher quality building, with better ESG credentials. Perhaps locations with greater amount of amenities and services, because they know that we are never truly going to go back to 100% occupancy. We never had it before COVID. So I think what the last thing I would add is that we should not lose sight of what the tech industry has taught us. It's okay for occupiers to experiment and then reiterate. You don't have to freeze your occupancy plan for 10 years. Just accept that you're going to reiterate every 12 months, every 24 months.
Despina, I think you had something to add there.
Yeah, I think the points that Ronan made are really very important. This issue about reducing footprint, but also improving and enhancing the experience. And I think as we blend work and life and have a greater focus on the social elements of ESG targets, there's really an opportunity for landlords like Heinz, like Ronan, to create greater permeability in new developments and leverage public realm to promote what I tend to call spatial equity to improve both the experience of users and community engagement. So I think we're going to see technology not just invested within the building itself and the user experience, but the wider community impact as well.
That's a really good point. And I think at a high level, something we kind of talk about at Fifth Wall is kind of viewing the space as, a workplace is just like a software tool, right? There's an ROI there, and companies should be willing to pay for higher productivity spaces, right? And it should be there's a synergy there that should be shared, right? If they're getting higher productivity out of their workforce through a better workspace, they should be willing to pay more, right? And I do think they will be. And that's where I think the data that we're focusing on a lot, and I focus on a lot, is productivity data. Because I do think that that'll be very interesting to watch as we go through that. Now, there's a million different ways to measure it, but I do think that'll be interesting. But I guess bringing on your point of the overall kind of spaces we work and how it's kind of molding from home and office and kind of our workplaces wherever we're working, right? That's kind of what we've kind of realized is, I guess, Philippe, you're kind of in a unique position because you guys also have residents, right? And I guess, what does this look like, in our homes? Kind of, has there been an increase in demand for homes that are much more digitally advanced? How are you supporting your residents? Because obviously at work, a lot of places have fiber or high-speed internet, but then, I can tell you just in London, you go home and there's still a lot of copper internet and et cetera. So how is Convivio, what have you seen out there from your perspective?
Well, Covivio is a long-term investor. We develop, as you said, our commercial real estate activity on three main asset classes: offices, hospitality, and resi. plus co-working. We have created 4 years ago a dedicated company, Wellio, about co-working. And we are on a European scale, mostly in 3 countries, France, Italy, and Germany. And in Germany, we own 40,000 resi assets in Germany, including 16,000 units in Berlin. And by the way, we have also the plan to build additional 3,000 units over the next years. So to answer your question, and regarding technology, I have the conviction that we have to find the right balance between, I would say, full digitalization, which sometimes is too much and does not fit what our clients and want or need, and the right digitalization. What I mean by right digitalization is the fact that we have to provide at least good connectivity. This is more than ever important due to the fact that home working for 1, 2, or even 3 days a week, sometimes more. So we have to answer the strong demand for Internet of Things, which means once again providing a good connection quality inside the home. And besides digitalization, we also have to provide a good environment thanks to large windows to let natural light to come in, or in balconies once again, in order to take fresh air or even sometimes work from outside. Just to give you an anecdote, during the first shutdown in France, there was a large survey which has been conducted asking people if they were happy with their apartment, especially in big cities, and what they were missing of, what they were dreaming of. And the main results of this poll show that people wanted at least 3 things. First, natural light. Second, balconies on a room, and a room to work in a safe and peaceful condition, including good connection. So these are the topics we integrate in our new building, whether in Germany and France. And I'm happy also to mention that we've been working with WiredScore for 2 RESI certification in France, in the Paris suburb. So at Covivio, we strive to meet the new requirements from clients, which once again is about the well feeling inside the home as well as connectivity. So we design the new services. We develop partnership with some PropTechs in order to provide new services, such as a contactless door opening system, a tenant app, etc., etc. So we have to find out, once again, the good equilibrium between full digitalization and a good digitalization.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think as a plug for WiredScore, they do have WiredScore Home, which I know is expanding through Europe, and it is an important thing. I actually think that people are big on the Grand Paris, and these infrastructure projects are really important, but I'm really surprised oftentimes that the digital infrastructure isn't talked about as much, because that leads to incredible productivity if you can get that right in a city. But I think moving on, I think with a similar point. So I guess Ronan, prior to the pandemic, we were kind of, as Despina said, kind of living in this hybrid world, but just not realizing it, right? That Mondays were kind of a little bit empty, Fridays were kind of empty, and now, we just kind of realized that. I guess how are, if you're an office manager, kind of what are you seeing in terms of the use of the days, in terms of the occupancy, and how do you think that? What does that tell us about what the hybrid will look like in terms of when we do reach some sort of end state, or some sort of balanced state?
I think that's a tough question, because I'm not sure we are completely out of the crisis, right? In many,
Sure.
many, commercial centers in our capital cities across Europe are still not at occupancy level of pre-COVID. But speaking to a number of large occupiers, and in particular the professional services sector, what's interesting is that pre-COVID, the Monday to Thursday occupancy in an office was below 30%, because clearly, by the nature of what people do, they spend a lot of time with the customers. And what a lot of these organizations are focusing on is how to be more intentional in really bringing people back together, so that they have time to collaborate, to socialize, and really focus on the cultural aspect of their organization. And some organizations are declaring that Friday is the day when we come together. It's a community day. It's a team building day. So it's okay if Monday to Thursday you are working wherever you need to work. But intentionally, we do want you to come together, have fun, spend some time maybe learning together on that particular day of the week. So I think from what I'm observing, many occupiers are still baking their formula, or what would be kind of the post-COVID reality. And from a landlord's perspective, we're engaging. We're beginning to have much more meaningful conversations about what do they see as their needs medium term to long term. Is it going to be about optimization? Is it going to be about more amenities, different locations, different levels of quality? But perhaps the spinner who's closer to many of his occupiers can share some more perspective on this.
I would concur with the intentionality point, Ronan. I think that is the really fundamental issue and I think that's the real change in terms of pre and post pandemic. It's our intentional and conscious decision of how we use space and why we go to the office. And that's what's going to really make the difference. So yeah, absolutely support what you said. And also the fact that it isn't a final state, right? It is going to be an iterative and agile process where we will continue to learn and adapt as we leverage data, as we, going back to Paul's point, look at different requirements that different occupiers have. Everyone's not at the same state of development. So this will vary and evolve as we move through this next phase of the purpose of the office and how we work.
It's a great point, and I think the question then is, again, it's a question of what the end state is, or not end state, but perhaps just kind of normal state. But I think that the question then is, when we get kind of a balance, what do we do with that unused space, right? Because obviously that's an opportunity cost that's kind of lost, and so I do think tech will play a role there, but just as much. I think, it's going to be up to the landlords and the occupiers, right? And I think, Ronan, we had talked about this before on this.
Yeah, and Rolf, I think maybe just to go back to a point that the spinner made a little earlier about spatial equity. I think in many large mixed-use locations, landlords are trying to figure out, how do I make this a 7 days a week destination that is not only for the office occupant, but also for the people who are using, my F&B or using my retail, using civic functions. And really, that's where I think we go back to the narrative of that destination, the brand and the value proposition that a particular building should have. And then you kind of diffuse a little bit that need that this is a Monday to Friday only use. It becomes a 7 days a week destination. It is accessible to a much wider sector of the community and society. And therefore, hopefully it will be attractive enough to generate the returns that everyone is expecting.
Paul, I see you furiously shaking your head there, so I'm gonna let you come in now.
No,
unless you're listening to
it's a
some
great
music we can't hear or something. So
It's yeah, no, yeah, it's great. It's look, for me, I work for RSCS. RSCS is kind of famous for measuring things, and I think that what are we measuring is the kind of crucial thing. I think what we're talking about here is an industry that's adding tremendous value and is very strategic and is being expected to deliver. So and I think that sort of point that we're looking at very closely is, what are we actually measuring to create those meaningful benchmarks to be able to kind of demonstrate value? And that's changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should, ignore the traditional things we measured as well. So, we're working on a piece of work, and the team at Wired have been really helpful about developing a sort of standard that talks about cost and compliance and function. Those are things you need to measure, how big, but also you need to link them to sustainability and performance. And somebody talked about contactless, doors, etc. That's a great piece of sort of compliance and function that will cost something, but that will benefit you in terms of the user. So I think the conversation around what we measure and why and how we use that to demonstrate value is really interesting. And I know this conversation is more about offices, but I think that those concepts and principles, we can learn an awful lot in every sector. We can talk about schools and hospitals, and I think that's really important, that we learn these lessons. So I think the measurement piece is the key for me, about demonstrating that value, and that's why we need these collaborative kind of exercises where we learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And I guess that segues nice into the next question, Paul, which is obviously you're in a unique position being kind of an industry body. Um, do you think it's important to have the common standards in the current climate? And I guess what opportunities does that bring for yourselves and for your constituents?
I think it's critical. I mean, absolutely critical that we have some common standards that we can all benchmark against. And I think the key, there is so much innovation and so much collaboration that is really meaningful now. And talking to the team at Wired and engaging with the Wired, there are so many different players in the industry now that the need for us to kind of be able to agree some common frameworks is really important, I think. But I think the appetite for that has never been greater. I mean, conversations like today to bring, the industry is different. We have a lot of tech coming into it. We have lots of, really engaged occupiers, really forward-thinking landlords, and very clued up tenants, and I think we need to kind of bring those people together under common standards to be able to kind of benchmark meaningfully. And that's really what we're focused on. So taking the industry beyond that sort of, let's just measure how big the space is, that doesn't tell you much. Let's just measure how warm the building is, that doesn't tell you much. Linking it to that people-centric approach. We've got a huge expectation. We have to deliver on the sustainability challenge. We have to deliver on the experience to get people back to buildings, and we have to measure that. And that's really why we need the common standards. We're going to have to prove that we've added that value whilst providing safe, functional spaces as well. It's an incredibly complex, connected space that we're in, but the data is the thing that's going to enable us to do that. So that's really, I think, but I think that's where the opportunity for standards will be.
Great. No, that's awesome. And we've gotten a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to make sure we try to answer as many as we can. I'm going to start with the first one, which I think is a great question. Whoever asked it, which is, how do you get the balance of technology and user requirements right? I'm going to start with Ronan, but other people jump in afterwards if you have thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. I think first of all, asking yourself, what am I trying to solve for? So is it about efficient management of my building? Is it about the sustainability credentials of my building? Utilities? Is it about user experience? What am I really trying to solve for? How fragmented is my system today, and how easy would it be to introduce a technology solution and derive the data and the data insights from that? I think it's quite as you know better than any of us, Rolf, it's quite a vast domain with a lot of different solutions, a lot of different players. And I think there's a need for some consistency, some simplicity in the way that occupiers, operators, and landlords actually engage together and answer those big questions. Otherwise, we're in danger of just deploying a lot of technology, not using it efficiently, and not really extracting the data and the insights to do something meaningful with it. So I think that asking yourself the question, what am I solving for, I think would be a great starting point.
Kind of first principles type framework, in a sense. Okay. Despina, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that, back to kind of the outcomes we're trying to achieve is really critical, because I think there's just so much going on in this space, and being able to understand the why, right? I set this as a theme for clients, both in terms of the office and the technology they want to try and use. So why do you want to collect data about something? What is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Begins to set the expectation barriers and the assessment. And I think someone during an earlier discussion, it might have been Renan, said something about being able to benchmark. So when you're measuring something, how do you know how well you're doing? And how do you begin to benchmark it? That is, I think, critical for us as an industry. And we will see more and more requirement for that, standardized sets of metrics to allow people to be able to understand where they are, where their aspiration is, and how they can use data and technology to help that journey.
That's great. And I think, maybe Philippe will pull you in here on the next question. It says, how do you as a landlord know what the changing needs of your occupiers are? And I think the question's probably more practical. So do you carry out research? Do you have open conversations with key stakeholders? What is the practical thing someone could take away from how a big, kind of prestigious owner occupier, developer and owner, like Covivio works with their tenants and customers?
It's both easy and not easy to answer this question. On the easiest part is the fact that each year and several times a year we conduct surveys directly toward our clients, asking them what they need, if they are happy with the working space they have rented. So this is the easiest way. Plus, we tried I'm in charge of innovation, so we try. That in innovation we have to try a lot and see at the end what is very interesting and what is creating value. So we tried several things. For instance, I mentioned the fact that we are also relying on IoT, on sensors, in order to measure space occupancy in some of our building. We do such experimentation with our clients. So we share the results of the experimentation with the clients, saying to them what we have seen in terms of conclusion, and we share this experimentation, and so we have direct feedback from our clients of what they are expecting in terms of innovation.
And Ronan, any thoughts there? I see you shaking your head there.
Well, I think so. I completely agree with what we just heard from Covivio, but I think when you have large occupiers, you need to develop a framework that enables your team to engage with them in a consistent manner, that everybody understands the ground rules, if you like, of engagement. What is the agenda? What topics should we discuss? Collect that, analyze it, really listen authentically. At the same time, I think it's a change of mindset. Don't believe that all investors, all landlords fully yet recognize that tenants are clients, and that we do need to start looking at them through that lens, that they have real needs and their needs are changing very fast, and we need to listen and engage and realign what we do.
I see you shaking your
Yeah,
head.
I'll just add something to what Ronan just said, and I think that's a really great point. And there's something about, as we talk about technology and occupier engagement, the real opportunity technology gives us is that it brings us a lens to be able to align subjective and objective data. And the only way that you can really understand what actually is happening is to be able to bridge those two types of data sets. And I think that's what becomes a really exciting opportunity moving forward, engaging occupiers differently and leveraging the data from the building to give you that combination to create new breakthrough.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Paul, any additional thoughts on that particular topic?
No, just to absolutely echo that. I think that's exactly it. That alignment between subjective and objective is really interesting, and that's exactly where the industry is. So it's a very exciting period to see how people are developing that, and I think that's where we need some consistency around the measurement piece. But yeah, I couldn't agree more.
That's great. Well, we're coming up on our end. They've asked me. I have the envious task of summarizing what we just talked about. So we've had a lot of topics. I think one theme I'm probably taking is, one, the workplace still is central to working, right? And whether that's the workplace at home or in an office building. Secondly, the workplace is a productivity tool, just like any technology. Third, I would say, is that technology is going to play a central role in this hybrid work, and that's going to create a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs that we back, but also companies to integrate technology. And I think fourth, probably most importantly, is is really now the real estate industry went from kind of tenant landlord to, service provider and customer, right? And that means that there needs to be a connection between the occupiers and the landlords themselves. There needs to be a dialogue. There needs to be a feedback loop that I think, I may say, I don't think existed before now. And so I think that in a lot of ways, that full circle of that kind of A/B testing, right, is coming to the real estate world. It's no longer here's a building, live in it. It's here's a building, doesn't meet your needs. How can we change it? How can we improve it? How do we increase, your productivity? And I think actually, truth is, with all this craziness going on with work, the consumer wins, right? The employee wins, the customer wins. And I think that's the long-term trend that we see, which I think great for everybody. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. I want to thank the panel. Amazing discussion. Really, really appreciate it. Very insightful. Feel very lucky to have moderated this. And now I'm going to hand it back over to William.
Thank you to Roelof and to all of our panelists. It's now my great pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Richard Pickering. Richard is the Chief Strategy Officer for the UK at Cushman & Wakefield, and he also co-heads the EMEA's Future Programme. He's going to be talking about the future of our cities. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, William. I'm delighted to be here. When looked at through the lens of our own lifetimes, it's easy to think that cities don't change. But if we go back over history, we in fact see infrequent periods of radical change to the urban form when the conditions are right. I believe that we're on the cusp of another period of very significant change, which will impact the way we work, shop, live and travel. And as our cities respond to this, there will be significant impacts on how value is distributed in real estate. In the next 10 minutes, I want to set out briefly why I hold that view, how this is shaping how we live, work and connect, and what this means for cities in the future. So since the dawn of recorded history, the city has been one of the most exciting human concepts. It's been synonymous with progress, the crucible of most of our great achievements, and the home to most of our commercial activities. These successes arise from three simple principles: economies of scale. Coming together makes us more efficient. It allows us to divide tasks and create value-added specialism. Agglomeration, for instance, the planned interaction of industrial groups. And serendipity, for instance, the chance encounter that might lead you to finding your future romantic partner. Now, cities create the conditions for these things to happen because they bring people together and they eliminate the penalties of distance. So that's the journey so far. However, technology brings change. In the past, technologies such as industrial machines and the steam engine have radically reshaped cities. For instance, the passenger railway broke the shackles of needing to live next to your place of work and created massive suburbanisation. In the internet, we now have a new technology that threatens to break the concept of distance entirely. As well as being the primary vehicle for information exchange globally, the internet is reshaping fundamental human constructs. Knowledge that was once proprietary and scarce is now abundant and open. Information exchange that needed to be in person can now be carried out remotely and instantly. We used to influence people through tightly controlled channels like newspapers and politicians, but now anyone can create influence anywhere using social media. Tony Blair recently cited social media as the driving force for political change globally. Processes that used to be reliant on human labour have been replaced by digital industrialism, and decisions that were previously informed by considered expert opinion are now being determined by instantaneous analysis of big data and aggregated peer reviews. The combination of these is huge, but it's also changing our economy. Fundamentally, we're shifting from an economy based on the movement of people and the movement of goods to one where the primary movement is now of ideas and information. Tangible assets are now worth less on business balance sheets than intangible assets. And about half of businesses are now classified as knowledge intensive, and it's these ones that are growing the most quickly. These new knowledge assets can be transferred instantly and essentially cost-free. The implication is that people no longer need to be near each other in dense urban environments to elicit the same benefits of scale and agglomeration. The concept of distance is being broken. Since cities were invented, there has always been a premium for central real estate. The further you farm a field from the marketplace, the less value that field has because of the cost, time and inconvenience of having to travel to the marketplace. The same is true today for residential assets. In fact, our regression models show that 70% of the value of just about any real estate asset is explained by its distance from an optimum, usually central location. But if we can now connect in new ways using digital technology, then the game changes, and value in real estate will be, I think, redistributed. It will change where we live. If, for instance, enabled by the internet, we choose to commute less often, then I suspect people will be willing to accept longer commutes on the days that they do. Logically, therefore, people might increasingly choose to live either further away from the centre, where they can get more for their money, or even relocate to smaller, vibrant towns and cities that offer greater quality of life, away from some of the challenges of our global metropolises. More radically, it could change where we work. We've proven over the last year that a lot of clerical work can be performed in your home, say 10 miles away from your office. However, if work can be done 10 miles away, it can be done 5,000 miles away. And if it can be done 5,000 miles away, it can be done 10 times cheaper. For the first time in history, the value of working has become divorced from the cost of living. And in the short term, this offers opportunities for the employee, but in the longer term, the advantage will be with the employer to source cheaper labour. I think we'll start to see a disconnect from those roles which require regular market-facing day-to-day interaction and those that don't, with the latter roles increasingly being dispersed to cheaper locations. It will also change what we do in our city centres. As I said earlier, one of the value propositions of cities is that they enable interaction, both planned and serendipitous. For most people, these high-value emotional or empathetic connections are of higher quality when performed in person. And I think that will stay the case for some time to come. But at the moment, our city centres house all forms of work and shopping activity, be they solitary focused activities or these high-value combinational activities. Again, it feels logical that the former are the ones that are likely to be done at home in the future, which means that our city centres will increasingly double down on the exciting, combinational and fun activities, which feels to me like a positive step. Nevertheless, we're going to need to find new ways of bridging connections between what will now be multiple modes and multiple venues of work. There's been a lot of talk around hybrid working in the past year, but that's the tip of the iceberg. What we should really be talking about is hybrid reality. The challenge with our current mode of hybrid working is that it lacks serendipity. There are no chance connections on Teams or Zoom, but new technologies are set to change that. We're already starting to see the emergence of virtual workspaces that allow you to interact with both office and home-based colleagues in much more ergonomic ways that promote collaboration. This is one that I trialled in the last month called Gather. Now take this and imagine that the floor plates were an exact twin of your own office floor plate, so you can now go and find somebody at their actual desk. And why not pop into your New York office for the day and do the same? Then using IoT and wearables, imagine that you can see exactly who is in the office and where, no matter where you are. And using virtual reality, you can walk around the actual office from a remote location and bump into real people. Or using augmented reality, you could take a stroll around your actual offices with virtual colleagues. Now, none of this is science fiction, and that technology already exists, and I'm convinced that this will be the future mode of clerical work. But our offices, and potentially our homes, will need to be tooled up to deliver this, which means excellent digital connectivity and IoT embedded by design. So what might this mean for the future of our cities? Well, to answer this question, a few of us at Cushman's workshopped various scenarios for the future and arrived at two critical uncertainties. Firstly, the rate of urbanisation or deurbanisation, and secondly, the extent to which our activities become more impacted by digitalisation and virtualisation. And that results in the four scenarios you see on the grid here. Our historic position is based on high urbanisation and low virtualisation, and is therefore characterised by high density person-to-person contact. We've called this one social animals. Despite the events of the last year, We consider it unlikely that people will disconnect from society and become recluses. However, we did think that a new society where virtual distant connections take more precedence was quite possible. We call that the matrix. And finally, there's a potentially exciting model in the top right here where augmented high-density contact becomes the norm. So which is it? Well, none of them and all of them. The future city will be a hybrid of these scenarios. I think inertia is powerful and that most of us will stay, for that reason, in the bottom right corner. But the drift we will see is into the top two scenarios, very much dependent on stage of life and demographic factors. Against the gloomy visions and narratives portrayed in popular media about the city of the future, I hold an exciting vision for cities in 2040. I see a city where technology enables a much more human-centric solution, where we travel less and more purposefully, where we waste less time and create less carbon, where people are able to get more amenity for their money and have greater choice of where they live, where our city centres become more focused on their value proposition of agglomeration and serendipity, rather than just being somewhere to sit at a desk in isolation, and where the places we live and work are seamlessly joined with new digital connections. Thanks for listening, and I'm going to pass back to you, William.
Thank you, Richard. I think your point about shifting from an economy that's based on the movement of people and goods to one where the primary movement is now of ideas and of information really resonates. It also reiterates the point that Sir Tim was making earlier about the importance of data and how we can use that as an information to create hybrid societies that benefit from people's experiences and perspectives, and different people and different experiences coming together from across the world to better inform the future that we all want to live. Moving now to our second panel, which is going to be on the future of the digital landscape, the social, economic, and infrastructural implications. I'm going to hand over to Joe Miller, the Frankfurt correspondent for the Financial Times. Joe, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, William. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here to moderate this very interesting panel discussion, as William mentioned, on the future of the digital landscape, the social, economic, and infrastructural implications. So not very much to cover there in about 40 minutes. Before I introduce you to our distinguished panel, I just want to briefly summarize that you can put your questions to the panelists using the Q&A function. Please feel free to do that throughout the discussion, and we will try and put the most pertinent ones to them as we go through this discussion. Now, without further ado, I thought I would introduce our panelists. We have with us Christina Ovschonka, Managing Director and Head of Core Funds at AEW. Here in Germany, we have Anna Strongman, the CEO of Oxford University Development. We have Javier Kendellen-Williams, Head of Valuation and Advisory for EMEA at CBRE, and Anna Cunha-Cribelier, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a Real Estate Senior Director at Deans Group. I had to go anyhow. So, as we've been hearing today, technology is essential to our ability to live, work, and connect. That's taken as a given if you've attended this forum. And it's also taken as a given is that this has profound implications for how we interact with the built environment, of course. And what matters now is harnessing that technology to the greater benefit of us all. And we have experts on that topic with us today. So I thought I'd kick off with a question to you, Anna. I should say Anna Cunha-Cribelier. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll say Anna Strongman or Anna Cunha-Cribelier, if I Anna C. Let's say Anna C. There's been a shift in focus on the impact of technology towards people and the environment rather than the advancement of technology itself. In your opinion, how can the industry build better and develop assets with the needs of the user at the heart of every project?
Well, I think that after all, it's people who use buildings, people who manages buildings, and people who trade buildings as assets with a specific value. One key issue for me is the purpose and how we can optimize the design or the operations for improved resilience of these buildings, and a matter of defining timely and integrated strategy to support multiple performance goals. And when I say that, I mean flexibility, well-being, people, health and well-being, resource efficiency, and clearly decarbonization, so that we can do more with less. And technology shall be seen as an enhancer for that, but not the key element in the process. And it shall be seen how this integrated approach can resolve properly matters of also data privacy and cybersecurity linked to building systems and people information. I don't think that when dealing with smart buildings or with the new issues of technology, we shall see real estate as simply an addition of technologies, but rather as a result of a global thinking and strategy that takes into consideration new obligations of performance, new regulations, that considers what we want to measure, what we need to report on or act on, what are the needed KPIs or benchmarks for an improved decision making with reliable data, and new working modes that were mentioned before in the previous panel, at the benefit of all of people, users, occupiers, visitors, and operators of buildings. Well, all this is impacted by the infrastructure that you put in the building that impacts finally what you can do inside. So there is a shift at Turns, we see it, a shift in how we design buildings, how certain questions or topics are called to be mentioned or defined earlier compared to a traditional process, and in a more comprehensive manner than before. And as we see our engineering changing at Turns, we see it also with the rest of the market, and there is a need for that. So although this technology is still not well known by the real estate players in general, so we're all moving fast, and after all, not as fast as technology, we need clearly to well understand the goals of the future use of these buildings, whether new or renovated, that actually will then orient the choices that are done in terms of infrastructure of the building, the technical or software, let's say, data infrastructure. And I think that we must not forget that as technology is not a mean or the purpose itself, we shall bear in mind this digital transition paired with environmental sustainable transition. So how one can serve the other for decarbonization, health and well-being. So because I believe that the assets can only be more valuable and resilient if we mix both instead of developing separately. So in this context of smart buildings, I think we need to learn all how to smartly design smart buildings, to think of their future use, the services that we are willing or aiming to provide, not just today, but tomorrow, the flexibility, and when technology shall not be a goal in itself, but actually a vehicle, an enabler, as it was mentioned before, to amplify the spectrum of usage for people and the use of data. And so that we can improve the different performances. And bearing in mind that a smart ready building doesn't grant a smart use of the building, so we need to link all the players, those who invest, develop, design, and use the building, so that these carbon and digital transition can actually provide services that are useful for the users, reply to new reporting obligations, and anticipate optimizations that shall occur in the building. And we see it because internally we are more and more linking carbon and digital due diligence so that we can finally define the functional requirements, the use cases, and the technical requirements that impact the infrastructure only after, and that we can enable improved operations and improved spaces for people after all.
It's something we'll come on to shortly. I'm sure the link between the designers and the users, or perhaps the quite weak link sometimes between the designers and the users. But Christina, I saw you nodding vigorously when Anna was talking about the shift from well, the traditional process towards the new design, and about the technology not being very well known yet. And I just thought, with your investment hat on, this rapid change, how can investors make sure that their traditional core investments remain core while keeping up with this challenge?
Yeah, well, I think my answer will resonate a lot with what Anna was just explaining. I mean, in the past, core has been perceived to be, let's say, rather simple, tick the box, like a strong covenant, long income stream. That's about it. Now we've seen the pandemic basically shaking up lives, routines, markets, but there are mega trends, below that have started way earlier and have been accelerated by this. So it's not a static thing at all, and there's much more to this. And one word that Anna has been using that's coming up a lot in our discussion, it's purpose. What purpose does an asset actually serve? Because it's not like a building for itself. There are users. It has a certain purpose, and you need to always ask yourself, why does an asset actually generate demand, and why does it generate sustainable demand even beyond the current occupation? And this is where the viewpoint and the focus point is getting much broader than it was in the past, and much more into the future. I was smiling when you just said smart buildings doesn't mean that they're used in a smart way, but it's good to start with a smart building and then educate and train the ones using it than the other way around. So for us, it's really, as I said, about purpose. A very simple example might be flexible office space. So you accommodate innovation, teamwork, but then in a safe environment. And it makes sense. So people don't only work from home, which is possible, or work remotely, what we just heard in the keynote, but there are points in time where they also need and want to come together, link in, connect, etc. So this needs to be accommodated. It's a very dynamic context, so you need to make sure that your asset is future proof, but not only now. It's not the past tick the box exercise. It needs to stay future proof. So hence, I think it's very clear that managing a core portfolio means you have to be very active in order to successfully do that.
You win the prize, Christina, for being the first to mention the P word, the pandemic, which brings me on very nicely to Javier. The hybrid work environment that Christina mentioned over there is, at least from where I'm sitting, increasingly becoming the norm. It doesn't look like companies are going back to the models of old. There's some kind of hybrid environment where the physical and the digital interact that seems to be the future, not least for this event. What does that mean for real estate owners? What do they need to do to sort of bridge that new divide between the physical and the digital? And have you seen anyone who's been doing this effectively recently? I suppose it's still early days, but are there any good examples out there?
Thank you, Joe. And a lot of the comments, again, really resonate with what we're seeing. We conducted a global survey in spring of this year to the large corporations with over 10,000 employees now. The surprising, well, actually not surprising, 87% of these agree that they're definitely going to go into a hybrid kind of workplace kind of environment in that sense. That's clear. We're definitely going in that direction. Remote working, it's there. What's still not very clear is how many days. And that's a question that the corporates can't quite answer yet. Is it a day? Is it 2 days? How are they going to really manage that? Is it an activity-based approach? Is it front office, back office? Is it depending on the activity that they're going to be conducting, differentiated? Well, what's very clear is that adopt this. And I think, everyone's really looking at right now 3 elements, which I think we mentioned earlier on. One of them is design, the design of the workplace from an ESG well-being perspective. You find that the occupiers, the users, are demanding more of the space that they want to use. It's more experience-based in that sense. And that's highly connected as well with talent retention. and talent attraction, which I think is something that the corporates are really concerned about. How does your property, how does the asset kind of attract that talent, attract the people to want to be there, connect, create a community in that sense, and make sure that this is my last point, an efficient use of the space. Now, we want to differentiate between productivity and efficiency, okay? And I know that everyone kind of agrees that right now, yeah, working from home is very productive, and everyone's seeing that that's been fantastic. Now, I would tend to disagree, and I think we need to kind of differentiate between productivity and the quality of that productivity, and how the cultural effects that we're all seeing in our organization of being, having this kind of long distance kind of remote working situations, and how it's affecting our culture and how that is affecting our productivity, and particularly the quality of the productivity. But let's go into the office space and what it means for us. So part of these surveys just goes to show that pre-pandemic, we're making kind of a 65% efficient use of our space. You need to understand that not everyone's there throughout the 5 days of the week. Not everyone's using it. So the average norm was that we're making around 65% efficient use of that space. Now, what we think is that with all these changes and the design of the workspace, with this focus in terms of sustainability, well-being, talent attraction and retention, that we're going to be finding new ways of designing the hybrid workspace to kind of reach levels of closer to 80%. So yes, it's going to mean that we're going to redesign the workspace. Yes, it means that, similar to some of the comments we just heard, this might promote the use of more flex space. Yes, we'll see some more of that in that sense. But I think we need to kind of remember that it really is about understanding what we want to create, the purpose of that office space. And I love that because it really makes just so much sense in terms of the experience, in terms of the community, and in terms of the quality, the productivity that you want to have in that workspace. And at the end of the day, you need to understand that, the quality of the interaction that we're having, even today, the Zoom, is not the same that you would have if you're in the same physical space. You can't kind of make the same social connectivity. You can't kind of collaborate in the same quality, in the same form that you would if you were together. So designing the right hybrid format and design of the office space is really important if you want to make sure that you create an environment that you can really augment the quality of that efficiency and the quality of that productivity, and that people do really want to spend time at the office connecting with others, sharing ideas, co-creating, innovating, and that at the end of the day has a direct impact on the resilience and the operational efficiency of the properties and how well they perform from a financial perspective. So when you look at it from an investment perspective in that sense, you need to understand what are the real impacts of that. Does it reduce the risk vacancy rates? Does it promote or contribute towards attracting higher rental premiums in the future? How does that look from a risk pricing perspective? And again, I know that you might be touching on that later on, so I don't want to get too much into it. But I think if I can just summarize, for me, it's really the design of the workspace, the efficiency of the utilization, and particularly looking at efficiency and not just productivity, and looking at the quality of that efficiency. And again, a very important point is about talent attraction and talent retention. And we are seeing that there's a lot going on in that space. There's tons of examples and lots of property owners already thinking of how to future-proofing those buildings. They're thinking about how they want to reduce the obsolescence that they might have in those properties, but if you look at it from a different perspective, how to make sure that they remain competitive over time, that they continue to attract the best corporates, the best talent, and that attract the highest rents, and that you keep the people inside those buildings from an occupier's perspective really, really happy. So creating amazing and great experiences. Sorry, that was a long-winded response, but I guess that's what we're seeing right now.
Not at all. It's very interesting you mention, firstly, the other P word, which, purpose, but also talent attraction and retention. Just anecdotally, the other day I heard from a banker here in Frankfurt, a Deutsche Bank employee, very high-flying employee, who now has taken a part-time job on the side as at a yoga studio because she missed the interaction with people. And there's this kind of feeling that there is going to be some balance between, what talent wants in terms of work environment and what's being provided, which leads me on, Anna S., if you would, to what this looks like going forward, and we're still trying to work out what these work environments will look like. We're seeing employees with a lot more power because the economy is running hot at the moment, but it's a bit difficult to work out what we need to do for the years to come, how cities need to transform, how universities need to transform to basically attract people, I suppose, back into the workplace and back into cities. What's your view of what needs to change, if anything?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, universities themselves are really focuses of knowledge and of learning, and increasingly of commercialization and economic performance. And what lies at the heart of that is ecosystem and networks between researchers, but also between businesses. And increasingly, we're seeing the importance of third sector parties within those third sector NGOs within that mix as well. And critical to a successful ecosystem is serendipity and unexpected meetings and unexpected conversations. And real estate within university cities is an enabler of that ecosystem effectively. And we're thinking through our property developments how to make the real estate as an effective enabler as possible. And that is partly about creating homes, it's partly about creating academic space, it's about creating commercial research space, and it's creating the public spaces and the bars and the restaurants and the gyms and the spaces in between. And we need to do that in the best way possible to support the most effective ecosystems, but to attract talent, as you mentioned. And universities are in a global war for talent these days. You need to be able to attract people from across the world. And they partly come because of the quality of the research, the quality of their colleagues, but they also, they expect a place which their families will be happy to live in, where they'll make friends, where they'll be part of a community. So I think it's absolutely critical to get the real estate right, and alongside to get the technology and the infrastructure which is embedded in that real estate right as well. That's not easy at all, because as we all know, real estate is slow and technology is fast, and real estate is capital intensive, and that's also quite an old-fashioned culture which behaves in a certain type of way. So I see technology and real estate as critical to supporting the success of universities and the cities that they are part of. Um, but I think we've got a lot of learning and thinking to do about the relationship between real estate, technology, and the ecosystems that I talked about.
It's interesting you talk about that global war of talent. When I was at university about a decade ago, it certainly didn't seem that the infrastructure was designed to win that war on talent. Things must be changing. Christina, on that topic of student housing, I wondered what your opinion is on the student housing market in general. What sort of changes are you seeing, but also, are there lessons that we can learn from student housing and what's happening in student housing for other asset classes, given how much of it is being built and how quickly it's being built?
Yeah, so I think, the student housing market is, if you look at the living market in general, it's maybe one of the more mature, maybe more mainstream submarkets within this. So let's say more or less evenly priced. But I think we can look at it from two angles now. The market, the asset class in its respective market, and I say the P word again, has been hit heavily by the pandemic. It's very obvious. No, all lectures remotely, no live at the campus whatsoever, no exchange programs, Erasmus, etc. So very obvious that the asset class was under heavy pressure. Now this is recovering slowly but steadily. There's a strong urge for young people to just go explore the world, meet others, and really study, not where they've been spending 18, 19, 20 years of their life within their family home, but really, well, see something new, go and live somewhere else. And this is then also where student accommodation becomes important. Now, from our research point of view, we see, as you say, there's been a lot being constructed. We still do see a lack of purpose-built stock. So from an investor point of view, good momentum for increasing rent based on the strong demand. But I think what we're discussing today, it's maybe more interesting and more important to look onto the occupier side. I mean, students, they are early adopters of technology in all ways. And I mean, of course, they're ready and they're open to try new technology, apps, etc. But I think what's more important and more challenging for real estate owners, developers, it's they're demanding. And they want things to change and they want this to happen quickly. And this is something where we, and Anna, you just said, the real estate is a small changing beast. So we need to find answers to that. And I think we have to really pay attention to those students with all that the demanding attitude they may have. They become the workforce that then are the talent that the corporates, as Javier was explaining, want to, well, they fight to attract them in the first place, and then they fight even harder to retain them. So we need to make sure that the environment we as a company, as a corporate, but also then as a landlord offer as a workspace. And if we want to learn something, I think from that market, it's really listen. It's a small group of users maybe, but they will be the most important component of our workforce for decades. So listen and then really try to adapt early on, and not take on the attitude of, well, we know it best, we know it better, but really listen and try to extract what we can adopt for the future.
Talking of listening, Christina, listening to students, but also to the market. More recently, you hear an awful lot about ESG, particularly with wake of COP26, and it used to be that the focus was on the sort of obvious areas like transport, but now we're getting a lot more interest in the carbon footprint of housing stock, etc. And Anna C, I wondered how you think technology can support ESG goals as we look to sort of creating a more meaningful digital landscape, for want of a better phrase.
Yes, I think that, well, technology won't solve the ESG challenges, but they can be indeed a tool to support the improvement of the different KPIs or results in this matter. We are mentioning before that it's not enough to do smart buildings. We need to think about smart use. And today, sometimes it is still thought to around the design, but not what happens on the data. This is generated after, and how to make best use out of that with dedicated platforms, or in order to transform data into information. And indeed, if we do it, you can have more accurate data monitoring, analysis, and management of the information. So I think that technology in this sense allows to generate reliable data, quality data, have therefore data availability and quality, to allow to understand what is happening in the building, how users are behaving or changing their behaviors, and how to act positively in the building, because this technology can give the possibility for the systems and equipments to interact in a goal of improved communication and performance. And when I mean performance, I'm talking in how this technology can support having an improved energy or water consumption, to track or improve, optimize occupation rates, whether it is to intensify the square meterage use, because we want to put more people in interactive, or to minimize it in case of pandemic, for instance, to limit also risks for health. How we can track and act over, or ask the systems to act over, elements like indoor air quality based on real occupancy, and also by knowing what is happening in the building with reliable data, we can take decisions that allow to reduce operation costs, to limit greenhouse gas emissions, and to support the monitoring or go in the direction of a certain decarbonization path, not just for one asset, but for a portfolio of assets, which can therefore satisfy better tenants and allow for flexibility of these spaces that optimize the experience inside, the well-being and the satisfaction of these occupants. So in summary, I think that this technology, if well thought, so and done in a way where less is more, so less technology and more functionality, so think it well before, how we can sense or track what is happening to have a better understanding of the situation, to monitor it and take improved decisions on an asset management or systems. And I think that on ESG, if we are able through this to improve energy performance, to improve well-being, productivity in the building, we will be improving the capital value of an asset through improved ESG by reducing the risk of obsolescence, as Javier mentioned before, ensure cybersecurity, and still have an attractive asset out there. And if we look also, or if this supports tenant retention, satisfaction, or user experience, and allows also to have optimized operations and propose new services, new revenue streams through that, I think that will be improving the ESG results and being able to track that progress more accurately, at least.
You talked there, Anna, as sort of a win-win situation in which the technological improvements that bring ESG improvements also improve the value of the asset. And Javier, I wondered whether that's beginning to filter through to the market. I mean, are investors paying a premium for buildings with a good sort of tech-enabled ESG story, or is that still to come?
What an exciting question. I think everyone's asking this, and is it a green premium, a brown discount? Is it a mix of it? I think, first of all, again, I don't want to pile on from what everything you said. Is an exciting panel, and I couldn't agree more with the comments that are being mentioned. But I guess when we look at smart buildings, for me, smart buildings have sustainable buildings. I don't see a difference between one or the other. I don't see a sustainable building not being a smart building or vice versa. So I think that's definitely there. I think when we look at the hybrid workplace and thinking of the future, technology cannot fail. I repeat that, technology cannot fail. That connectivity is so important. So the that element is really, really important in making sure that our businesses, which are becoming more and more dependent on the use of data, not every data, but we are more dependent on the big data and the machine learning and everything in helping us qualify our decisions, connect people and whatnot. So if you want to have an effective hybrid working perspective or a space, you need to make sure that the connectivity, that smart building, the technology works really well. And we need to look at how this will be enhanced in the future so that the quality of the engagement that we're doing now and the experience that we all get from a virtual hybrid perspective is really, really much more effective. And I think that's important. So looking at the quality of the connectivity, making sure that does not fail, making sure that we can access data. Not every data. We need to interpret data. Not everything is correct. We need to make sure that we focus on quality. Don't take all data for granted and just think it's useful or whatever. No, we need to make sure that it's properly interpreted. And that that we allow for that kind of connectivity between the virtual and the physical world through technology and that connectivity and that. So that's really, really important. I think the next element really is about how that enhances value. And again, I invite everyone to look at a report that we recently published that looks at how the ESG certification really contributes towards creating value in real estate. Again, recently published only 10 days ago. And there's two elements there that we highlight in the report. One is reflecting through an analysis that we've done across most or the major markets across Europe and highlighting how it really just over the period of 5 years, we managed to demonstrate, which is, this is hard, quantifying and demonstrating that there's been a lower vacancy around those properties that have that level of certification, the BREEAM, the LEEDs, and whatnot, and looking particularly at how it really impacts at vacancy risk, lower void periods and elements that really do influence the resilience of a cash flow on a property. But also looking at the rental premiums. And again, we've done the same analysis over a period of 5 years and trying to understand, according to the different levels of certification, where you've got or achieved greater rental premiums. And again, that's really important because so far, the past 10, 15 years, we've been talking about sustainability and the impact that it has on price and value. And everyone kind of agrees that it's implicit, it's there. You need to understand exactly, to what extent and which elements is it contributing towards making it a more resilient building. Now, the challenge for us has really been, how do you quantify that? How do you measure it? How do you take observable evidence that is reliable, that's consistent, and model that so that at the end of the day, you can make a series of assumptions based on that to project future cash flows in that sense, and trying to understand the real impact and influence of, not doing the upgrades on the properties and how that might impact obsolescence and how that might impact your own appreciation of risk pricing from an executive perspective. So right now we're in a situation where, as I said, we are tracking and measuring elements like vacancy risk, void periods, rental premiums. And we are obtaining that data and modeling that data to really understand what impact it's having on the resilience of that cash flow, the financial and operating performance. So it isn't just about tracking the lower running costs and how it contributes towards producing a smaller kind of carbon footprint. That is really important. It isn't just about obviously ensuring that through the design or whatever, it's creating a more a better experience, well-being, satisfaction from an occupier perspective, which has a huge impact as well in kind of the retention of the tenants, the void periods, the rental levels that they're willing to pay in that sense. So we're in a process where we're actually being able to collect that data, as I said, and being able to report it. And I think right now we're going to be seeing that a lot of that green premium really is already implicit in the price and the values that we're seeing in the properties. And the real challenge here is understanding in terms of the future prospects of how that obsolescence, that future proofing of the properties is really going to start having an impact in terms of how we appreciate and how we translate into price or value that potential obsolescence of the properties. And that's where we're going to see that brown discount, I guess, to some extent. But I guess connectivity, technology being an important element now in making sure that those sustainable smart buildings do work in retaining those tenants and attracting tenants and making sure that the experience is top end and they're willing to pay the highest rent. So it is highly correlated.
Yeah. Javier painted a very good picture of the technology landscape as it stands today and the various sort of upsides from that. But Anna asks if I can put the $1 million question to you on technology, that is. We know sort of what's possible today, but what do you think is the biggest challenge for the real estate industry in the next 10 years when it comes to technology?
I think the biggest challenge for this industry is moving fast enough. I mean, it takes a long time, particularly. I'll be honest. I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, our planning system, for many good reasons, it means that development takes a long time. And I'm building a new innovation village campus, 2,000 homes, 2 million square foot commercial space, new schools. We're starting now. We probably take us 2 to 3 years to get planning permission, and then another 5 to 10 years to build it. And we're talking about what technology we will embed now in something that will be built in 3 to 4 years' time. So I think that the difference in timescales is a big challenge. I think the capital intensiveness of development means that it's hard for it to flex and try things because it's a lot of money on the table. I think culturally, it's not an industry which has always embraced innovation or technology, and I think that's a big challenge. You see a lot of change in the sector, and but it still has a bit of a way to go. I think that real estate also, there's a fundamental philosophical challenge because real estate is so critical to everyone's lives. You know, even with hybrid working, we've still got to go to bed somewhere. We've still got to go shopping somewhere, you know, once in a while. We've still got to kind of go to the gym now and again. You know, we interact with real estate all the time. And so what is the role for technology in terms of uh, interaction? You know, we don't want our homes to be creepy. We don't want, you know, technology to overstep the mark. You know, we want it to be simple. We want our lives to be simple. So how can technology aid simplicity as opposed to create additional layers of complexity? And I think my final point would be on the S in the ESG. And I would challenge technology really to how is technology going to aid social inclusion and open up opportunities for all. And it's very easy in the ESG debate to lose sight of that because there's so much focus on environmental performance. And you know, technology can open up information, but it can also close down worlds. And I think that's a big challenge for technology and for real estate, is to open up opportunities and to open up opportunities within our sector.
Yes, I think there'll be a lot more focus on whether the E is coming at the expense of the S in the few years to come. There's plenty of questions from the audience that I think we should get to. I'll start with one which is for anyone who wants to jump in. Does the panel feel that buildings would benefit from owners and occupiers being able to install their own comms infrastructure rather than reliance on comms operators' installation and design? Who wants to jump in on that? Christina, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll have a go, and then please, fellow panelists, just add to that. I think yes, whoever from the occupier and owner, well, let's put the owners aside, but you have small and large occupiers, and if an occupier is large enough to have all that intelligence and capabilities in-house, then of course it'll benefit because you have a discussion that's really at arm's length, if you wish. So you can challenge installations and really improve things. But I think if we focus only on that possibility, you really will kind of exclude all the small tenants that go for one single office area, gym whatsoever. That don't have the knowledge in-house within themselves, and they need guidance and help. And if you exclude that, they would then need to, well, pay the price for it because they would need an external advisor, etc., to help them walk their way through. So I think where the capabilities are there, it's very good to do that and to join forces, because it's about building not only a market, as we've discussed now for the length of the panel. It's impacting the whole of our lives generally. So to bring that together, but I would not exclude all the small tenants that just can't contribute to such a discussion and would be left behind.
I've got a different opinion. Apologies here, because I know we're seeing that cybersecurity is an important element, and I think having control over the communications, I think is super important. It is also very capital intensive, and it's also constantly changing very rapidly. If you just look at the past 10 years and the way that we've gone from the 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G now, what's going to be next? And that's just wireless kind of connection. So security and cybersecurity being a huge issue. That being also very capital intensive and needing some form of proper planning in terms of the infrastructure. You can't have a spaghetti of connections there. That really does potentially undermine either security or future upgrades or connectivity or whatever. So I think it can work in certain buildings where you might have a group of smaller tenants that, obviously are all around a different sector and whatnot, and that's something that they need. But I guess if you're looking at a high-rise building and then CBD and a big office market sector, I think that's going to be really complex to have that. But I love the suggestion. I think if you put that in front of the owners and landlords and say, hey, don't worry, we'll put in our own connections, I think they'll say, fine, fantastic. It'd be a bit hard coordinating with them.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. I wanted to just jump to another couple of questions because we're running out of time, if that's okay. There's a question for the whole panel. As a sector, are we good enough at collecting and sharing standardized data to allow us to understand market level performance, which is critical for benchmarking? Anna C, perhaps you have a stab at that. Are we good enough at collecting and sharing standardized data?
Not yet. I think that the understanding of smart building potential is also evolving in time, and I see it. What was being asked 7-8 years ago when we designed the edge, and what is being now requested for the new buildings. I think that we're all learning in the process, and the fact that some are front runners and define their own pathways and certify at the end. Others go for certification also to learn with the process. But that's why I was mentioning that it's important to think of the proposed and not to think just of what we put inside a building, but rather what we want to get and allow for through the building, and based on that we decide the technology inside, and when defining the requirements for such technology, to define clearly what we want to collect and how to structure the data. Today we still have some smart buildings that are designed and where the systems do not connect, which limits the potential of insights we can get out of it, or what we can provide to users to adapt the space to their benefit. So I think that we still have work to do in terms of naming standards, labeling, in connecting, designing things so that everything can talk, the systems talk to each other, not just in one asset because it will prove its performance, but we've been talking more and more about decarbonization, zero energy buildings. Not all building will be able to be really zero energy, so but we can talk about zero energy neighborhoods. So we need data that needs to communicate to generate synergies between these buildings within an urban space or within a campus, so that you can benefit the most. And once again, it's not the proposed. So for us, it's not the technology is not the proposed. So for us, it's important to always think, whoever, and in link with the previous question, whoever is managing or installing the systems, to define clearly the functional requirements, what we want to put there to get and to allow for, and based on that to define the technical requirements to whoever will be installing or managing, to be able to ensure that the links are still there, and that things are not lost in the process when the stakeholder changes. So I think that's where we need to be able to clarify that along the building process and all the chain, so that it's not lost but is properly managed. We have cases of clients that do define the infrastructure, the functionalities they want for all their portfolio, and then the technology selected based on a case by case. Others test in one building and roll out for others the same technology, but exploring functionalities based on the tenants. The important is to start in why and what we want to do out of the data in there. And by defining that, you can create the links. But I don't think the market's today ready for that. At least we see it, but not in large scale. So the question needs to be raised.
Thank you, Anna. We're running out of time very, very rapidly. I just wanted to get to one more question, perhaps, Anna S., perhaps you want to take this, which is climate change is a financial risk for real estate. This requires adaptation to deal with heat waves, flooding, and emissions reduction. How can real estate and cities adapt to future-proof asset values? The question is about existing stock, what we can do to make sure they're more to what's coming down the line.
Yeah, I mean it's complicated, but I think it is asset specific, to be honest. I mean, we actually are looking at future proofing of some of the historic properties in our portfolio, as well as designing in future proofing into the new buildings that we're building. And it can be as simple as making sure that you can put shutters onto windows, for example, to enhance shading, through to much more complicated future proofing of the fabric of the building, for example. So I think it's important. I think everyone's going to have to deal with it. I think some people won't deal with it until it's staring them in the face. But that's what makes development interesting. We've got to deal with all these different things, from people to climate change to trends to keeping everyone happy. So that's why I love it. It's a privilege, and we've all got to rise to the challenge.
Well, I think we've certainly outlined that there's plenty of challenges to keep us all busy for the foreseeable, or at least until we next gather. Thank you so much to Christina, Anna, Javier, and Anna. I think we've very succinctly there talked about the speed of the transition. Oh dear. Is everyone else hearing that alarm? I think it's gone. Yes, we talked about the short-term challenges of the pandemic and how they translate into the future landscape, the importance of data, the importance of that link between the users and the designers, the importance of shortening those lag times between planning and building, and the challenges of ESG and the capital intensity of future proofing to make sure we reach those goals, which are more likely to be more stringent in 10 years' time than they are today. So only remains for me to thank you all for your time, and hope we can do this again sometime. Sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions, and it's been a pleasure to be here today. Back to you, William.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really interesting discussion. And now, I'm incredibly proud to reveal the forward-looking companies committed to WiredScore. I will introduce the 61 buildings across 12 countries that are leading the way in technology throughout Europe. First up, from Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, STIR. From Art Invest Real Estate, Millennium Tower. From BNP Paribas, Bolero Business Park. From CBRE Investment Management, Südkreis Berlin. From Cogedim Club, Quai Saint-Pierre. From Commerce Real, 140 West. From Convergence, an office building in the heart of Budapest. From Covivio, Antony, Avenue de Gaulle, and Modon Bellevue. From DWS, MREC Espoon, Safiri, and Solar Business Valley. Valmagan 9, Solna United, and Mariavik 28. Rondo 1, Nefrit, and Topaz. And finally from DWS, Focus and Grunwald Ski Center. From Europa Capital, Grace Stockholm. From Hines, Portland Towers. From Host, Frobisher House, the Old Dairy, and the Printworks. Hope Street Apartments and the Metalworks. Apollo Works, and finally from Host, the Glassworks. From Immovala, Arisp, Colisée, and Les Essentiels. Les Clos de la Haine Blanche, Terra Souliu, and Les Tourmalines. And finally from Immovala, Les Jardins d'Aristide. From Invesco, Phoenix. from LaSalle, CB1, 1 Penryn Road, and The Helix. From Moorfield, a Moorfield Group development in the southeast of England. From Patrizia, 2 residential developments in Bavaria. And finally from Patrizia, the Lamp Factory. From Reno Partners and Partners Group, Wadowicka 3C and Tertium Business Park. Rivergate in Vienna. From Roundhill Capital, Nido Dresden, Lumino, and Ashland House. Also from Roundhill Capital, RD Point, Currahee Point, and Broga House. From Sirena and Pinebridge Investments, Marinarska Business Park. From Swiss Life Asset Managers, Leopolderstrasse 70 to 72. Also from Swiss Life Asset Managers, Zentrum Renweg and Maximum. From the Valesco Group, Twin City Tower. From Value One, Weitblick im Wartel 2. And finally, from Watkin Jones, Grove Crescent Road. Congratulations to all of those buildings. In addition to the buildings that have committed to WiredScore, I can announce that to support our mission to make the world's buildings smarter and better connected, we've launched several new accredited professional programs across Europe, covering WiredScore in office and home, as well as SmartScore. Our partners in this are a remarkable group of companies that have committed to becoming accredited professionals. We will work closely with them to set the global standards for technology in the built world, and ultimately to drive better outcomes for the users of real estate. These organizations are joining our global network of WiredScore and SmartScore accredited professionals. Together, we're helping clients around the world to design future-ready developments and upgrade existing buildings to stand the test of time. Together, we're making the world's buildings smarter and better connected to enable a more collaborative, innovative, and dynamic future. Today has been about technology and the built environment and how those two things come together. We've heard about changes developers and owners are experiencing, and also the incredible opportunities that a well thought through built environment can bring. But most importantly, today has been about people. It's been about the users. People need to be the focus of any technological implementation. By stepping back and having a discussion today about how our homes and offices are coming together, we're able to appreciate the full impact that hybrid living is having. So, to all of our fantastic speakers, thank you. To those landlords and buildings newly committed to WiredScore across Europe, congratulations. To our accredited professionals, we look forward to partnering with you both now and for decades to come. And to those attending, we hope that you've enjoyed the inaugural WiredScore Future Forum. Please don't forget to read our report online. We'll also be sharing insights there from the discussion today. So finally, now it's an opportunity for you to share your thoughts with each other in our networking session. Please do click on the networking icon on the left of your screen to join the virtual discussion. Through the wonders of modern technology, the WiredScore team will be available and delighted to have a chat with you. Thank you all. Goodbye.